there. Welcome to the Ofrenda. My name is Nicholas Gonzalez. Thanks for coming over. Each episode, we'll get the chance to meet someone new who may not be able to introduce themselves anymore. We'll talk with those who knew them, as well as discuss all of the different topics that arise whenever you pause and take the time to remember people. Today, our guest is a good friend of mine. It's someone who we met back in college, and we went and did a lot of the same shows and projects together. He has continued on to further studies, as well as furthering his own career in audio and stuff like that. He's recorded music, and now he's actually getting his master's, but in a different field. Let me introduce you all to Bradley. Hey, Bradley.
Hi, Nick. How you doing?
I'm good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a while since we've talked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's this year has sort of. I feel like it was not too long ago when you were in Houston for Chicago and we visited, but I also feel like we lost kind of a whole year with this whole pandemic. So I'm realizing it's been a lot longer since I've seen you than I thought it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great to touch base again.
Yeah. No, I remember walking around and you showing me the theater that you were working at and just all the different projects that you guys were doing at that time.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that basically for the most part, theater is dark right now. I know you all had to end, and your tour that I think was still going on. I'm trying to remember how that timed out, but yeah. And then the Alley Theater where I was working at the time had to shut down, and they're doing a digital season. But a lot of us have sort of ended up pivoting or doing other projects during this time because we can't do theater in person anymore, which is kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you've pivoted quite a bit because you're now studying to be a mental health professional, correct?
I am, and this is something that I was sort of planning on. It's sort of weird how it panned out because I've been thinking about it for years as something that I would eventually, want to go into. And I love theater and love everything I've done for the last, decade or so in the performing arts. But I really felt this call to make a difference in a different way and to, study to be a counselor. I want to especially work with other members of the LGBTQIA plus community in mental health, and been planning it for a couple of years. And then I finally put in applications for different graduate schools, which I guess would have been January of last year, January of 2020, before, any of this past year sort of went down. We didn't know what was going to happen. So I put those applications in thinking that, okay, if I get accepted, I'll give the theater plenty of notice. I can finish out the season. I can work with them until July, and then maybe I'll go on and find another job that I can do, that's a little more flexible as far as my time, so that I can do that, while I go to grad school. And I thought, I had this whole thing planned out about exactly how it was going to go down, and all of this time I was going to have to sort of transition to the next phase of my life. And then, it happened a little bit differently than I thought it would. But I'm pretty blessed in the fact that I sort of already knew what I was going to do next when I found myself in March getting furloughed from my job, and then in May getting permanently laid off from my job due to cutbacks to COVID. And so I found myself in a weird situation this year, but it wasn't entirely unplanned. It's interesting that I think a lot of people assume that it was just sort of like, oh, well, I can't do theater anymore. I might as well go into counseling. But those plans were in the work for years. It's just crazy how the timing worked out, and the fact that the industry that we worked in for so long, really is not super in existence right now. And then I was able to, instead of going through as much of that sort of identity crisis of what do I do next, I already sort of had another plan that I was going to eventually go into anyway. So yeah, that's where I am. I'm in my second semester at the University of Houston in a 3-year program studying to be a mental health counselor. And then after that, I do a little bit of an internship, and then eventually be able to get fully licensed. So the process takes probably about 5 years. But yeah, I started that this year.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds great, because it basically sounds like you had an idea to change over, and this last year just kind of fast-tracked it and kind of solidified your choice then a little bit.
Yeah, it was crazy. Actually, I got accepted into the program that I'm in now the same day that I got furloughed, and it was not planned. I remember I was still in the Zoom meeting where they're like, hey, we're going to have to let a bunch of people go because this and this and this. And I looked down at my phone and I got the acceptance letter. I consider myself pretty fortunate to have something like this to fall back on when I know a lot of others sort of had to figure that out as they went.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, who would you like to introduce us to today?
I would like to introduce you all to a mentor and a friend of mine who passed away this last summer due to COVID-19. Her name was Reverend Vickey Gibbs. She was the associate pastor at a church here in Houston called the Resurrection Metropolitan Community Church. RMCC is an LGBT affirming congregation here in Houston, part of a larger international network of LGBT affirming churches. And Vickey was the associate pastor there. She was also a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a Black lesbian woman minister in the South of all places. Just one of the most incredible people I've ever come in contact with. She dedicated her life and her ministry to social justice work and standing up for marginalized people. And then, like I mentioned, she passed away in July from complications due to COVID-19.
She sounds pretty great. And I mean, like you said, being a Black lesbian reverend in the South must have been interesting for her.
Yeah, when you first asked me to do this, I think you messaged me a few weeks ago and said, hey, do you want to be part of this podcast? As soon as you explained the concept to me, I knew that I wanted to talk about Vickey. And what happened next, through most of the weeks leading up to this recording, is I had sort of this like fluctuating self-doubt on whether or not I should. It wasn't that, I don't know. The thing that kept coming up to my head is, this is such an incredible woman who impacted so many hundreds, if not thousands of people, in her life. And, I kept thinking, is this my story to tell? Am I the person who should come on here and do this? And luckily I was able to get in touch with Vickey's wife, Cassandra White, and said, hey, this is what I want to do. Obviously I'm not an expert on Vickey's life, but, I have several stories about how she impacted me personally. I know plenty of other people do as well, but I just wanted to talk about her through my own experience and maybe point people to some resources to where they can learn more about her life, outside of my experience as well. And luckily she was extremely supportive and will be listening to this when it comes out. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to discuss, but like I said, I'm not an expert on her life, but throughout the past 5 years or so, she touched my life in, really, really important ways, and I'm really excited to share a lot of that with you today.
Yeah. No, and I know for a lot of people, it can be hard to talk about someone who may not be directly connected to them, but like you've mentioned, she was someone who affected you greatly in your life, especially recently, and so I think it's important to recall those people as well, because as important as it is to go back and remember those who were connected to you in some way, it's also good to think back on the mentors or even the people who you were mentors for and stuff like that. So
exactly. And I guess I should probably start at the beginning about how I met Vickey and sort of my origin story with her and sort of how I'm noticing some parallels between our two stories and how we ended up at this congregation. Vickey moved to Houston when she was 18 years old to attend Rice University. From what I understand, read about this church in LGBT publication that they had, circulating around the city at the time. And, she got up the courage to go to a meeting, to a service at this church, and walked in, not knowing anybody, not really knowing, I think, what exactly she was looking for, but came into this congregation and was welcomed, as well as saw herself represented. I remember an interview that she did where she talked about coming in and having grown up missionary Baptist, was surprised to see that there was a woman at the pulpit and that there was a woman consecrating communion that first Sunday that she came in. And that's when she started thinking about, look, maybe this is something that I could do myself. And though I'm not going into ministry, I remember about 5.5, almost 6 years ago, doing something similar. I had come to Houston for work, and it was about a year or so after coming out as gay to my family and friends and distancing myself from the religion that I had grown up in. And I found myself searching. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, but I remember just Googling, I guess the later day equivalent of looking in a magazine or a publication. I think I Googled, gay affirming church Houston ? And then got a listing for this place called Resurrection MCC. And I ended up walking in at 24 to this church that I had never been to, not really sure what to expect or what I was looking for, and Vickey was preaching that day. And I remember sitting in the back, basically as far back as I could, and listening to her preach. And I remember that the sermon series was called Learning to Walk in the Dark. And she spoke about how, our trials in life and those times that we spend in the dark, not sure where we're going to go or what we're going to do, how those can, if we have faith in those and we make it through those, those are the points in our life that define us and make us who we are. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. And I remember just feeling extremely connected to her as a minister, the way that she spoke, in the manner that she spoke, and the things that she said, just like I felt immediately connected to her. And that service, actually, I got up the courage to go up when they were doing communion at the end, and it was a little different than how I had been used to or how I had been raised with communion, but you got on this big line, and they would send you to different stations where volunteers had communion. And I remember just saying in my mind, like, I want to go to Vickey's station. Right after hearing that sermon, I just knew that I wanted to connect with her a deeper way, but I didn't have the courage to go up and really introduce myself or like make myself known to people yet. That would take a lot longer, but luckily my time came and they sent me to Vickey Station. And I remember, just something as little as being able to have, 30 seconds with her to take communion that day. I felt so grateful for after hearing the sermon that she gave. And, those experiences is what set me back, over and over again. And I kept a pretty low profile at this church for a while, eventually got more involved. I got to know Vickey a little bit more through these Wednesday night classes that she would do where we would read different texts. I think I started with we were reading a Brene Brown book, and we would come every week and discuss all of that. And just, that day, I remember that first day where I came in, not sure, knowing what to expect, hearing her preach, and just feeling that connection, and then having, several other experiences with her throughout the 5 years that I knew her. It's just, I think like you mentioned, it's just such a special relationship. Even though we weren't like personally close, we didn't hang out or anything like that. We had one-on-one interactions, but no different than she would have had with, other people in the congregation. But they impacted me quite a bit.
That's quite powerful to have with someone, especially like you said, you were kind of stuck in this, lost in this situation and weren't sure what to do, and to find someone and later on find out that they were kind of in a similar situation is interesting and quite powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting that I didn't really know her story or how she got started in ministry until much later, but there are, I think, some parallels in what we were searching for and, how we ended up finding it. And I'm so grateful that she walked into that church, years before I did, and decided to dedicate herself to this ministry and to, ministering to people that other churches have rejected. And just such a powerful calling that she had, one that I am definitely personally grateful for.
What would you say would be the best quality that called out to you about her?
That's a really good question.
Because it seems like when you first saw her, there was something about the way that she gave the sermon and everything else that you connected with. So I'm curious, like, was there anything that you realized, maybe not then, but later on, what it was that kind of drew you towards her?
I think it was, I don't know if boldness is the right word for a quality, but that's the first thing that came to mind, is that anytime she spoke, it was, especially in her sermons, which is interesting. I have another story that I can share later about, how Vickey spoke on the pulpit versus how Vickey spoke, like, if you saw her in the hallway and said hi, or if you were in her office, or different things like that. But every time I heard her speak, she was always so in tune, and I always felt like she was so sure of everything that she was saying. And I guess, yeah, just the bold, unapologetic way that she would speak, and the way that she would stand up for people, and the way that she would interpret writings and scripture in ways that were bold and were unapologetic and were affirming. I think I listed like 3 qualities there, but that's, I think, what first stood out to me as I was getting to know her, as I heard her speak, is just this bold manner in which she spoke that was just so impactful. I guess another thing that I should say about Reverend Vickey is, as I reflect on this, I'm so grateful, because I shouldn't have needed someone to point out the inequities in society for me. I think those of us who experience white privilege, all have to sort of go through this reckoning in, figuring out where our biases are, and, making sure that we're accounting for, what we're doing to either perpetuate inequities or to help solve inequities. And I consider myself really grateful that throughout the years with Vickey, she would always call out the injustices. And I remember one time in particular, and I don't remember, it's sad that I can't say I don't remember which situation of police brutality we were speaking about that day. There's too many, and I don't remember which one it was. But I remember her saying something to the effect of, once you see this, you can't unsee it, calling out to, systemic racism and to injustice. And that phrase, that invitation, was really what opened the door for me to start looking at the world and at life a little bit differently. I also remember another sermon that she gave where she talked about her grandson that was being born, and when she found out that she was going to have a grandson, all of the anxieties that came through about him growing up as a Black man in America, and all of the different things that she was thinking about in terms of, how do I talk to my grandson about this, and how do I make sure that my grandson is safe? And there's several other accounts that I'm probably think of as well, where it was just these simple invitations to me to look at things differently and to examine issues of marginalization and issues of injustice, a process that I am still working on and still trying to examine in my own life, and, do better at standing up for those who experience racism and who experience discrimination. But I'm so grateful for those just little invitations from Vickey to do better and think deeper. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily have that mentor to just be able to call things out for what it is and allow you to look at those things. But I'm so grateful for the times that Vickey made me think more about those issues.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations where if you're not directly affected by something, it's pretty easy to kind of pretend that it's not happening to you, or to not notice it even. But yeah, it's sometimes necessary for someone else to tell you what's actually happening around you.
Yeah. And, I one of the larger stories I wanted to talk about today that's sort of tangentially connected to that. But I guess if I could pick two things that I really want, to get through, or two stories that I'd really want to get through to the listeners, it would be this one and that, the second one of her final sermon, which I'll get to. But I remember a Sunday so it was right after the Orlando nightclub shootings at the Pulse nightclub. And for a series of sermons, what they would do is they had candles lit in the sanctuary for each one of the victims of that shooting. And something in the sermon would tie back to that so that we could remember what had happened, to all of those victims in Orlando. And this is the one I'm going to get emotional at. Unbeknownst to most of us is Vickey had another candle in her office that throughout this series that she would light, and that it was just her personal ritual that she would do until, I don't know if it was the last Sunday in that sermon series or, one of the last Sundays. We had been doing the candles for a while, and she brought in this other candle. And at some point in her sermon, she let us know that she had been lighting this candle for the shooter, who also died that day. And that, even though he had brought about all of this violence and destruction, he had died too, and he had a family, and he was also a victim of this societal injustice and this violence that perpetuates in society. And the Shin together lit that last candle and put them with the rest of them to honor everybody who had died that day, including the man who had committed the shootings. And I don't think anything has ever impacted me more than that sermon that day. It's something that I think about a lot, getting ready to go into counseling as well, is that I'm probably going to start working with people that I might not totally agree with, or might have issues that might be uncomfortable to me, or struggles that I don't fully understand. But just one of those memories that always sticks with me about how Vickey taught us about injustice, and how she taught us to view all people at the same time.
Wow. No, I remember hearing all the news and everything from that shooting, and I honestly don't remember hearing anything about the shooter, or at least nothing to that regards.
I'm definitely not an expert. I know that he died that day, and I know that there is evidence that he had frequented that club before and was also on several gay dating apps. There was sort of a history that they found about him that he might have also been gay. I don't know anything other than that, but I do know, and I'm not sure if it was I'm not sure if it was a suicide, or if he was killed by police in order to, stop the situation, or what had happened. But I do know that he also passed away, in addition to the, I think, 49 victims of that shooting.
Yeah, and it's one of those where even if you do take the time to think about the shooter and what was going on, it's hard sometimes to have sympathy towards someone who's caused so much pain and suffering for others. But yeah, it sounds like Vickey was able to see past that and recognize that was a human, that was a person.
Yeah, and that's, I know you asked me before, and I sort of stumbled through my answer, but what quality, was apparent when I first met Vickey, and, her, and I said, her boldness and her unapologeticness, and to be able to call things out for what they were, and to stand up for injustice, and to just be so bold, and to not dance around things. And what's incredibly impressive to me is that she can get up and give an impassioned sermon about, the consequences of gun violence, and at the same time hold space for the person who had committed that violence. I don't know how to do that. I want to learn how to do that, but just that she had the qualities to be able to to do both, to say, yes, this is a human and I care about this human, and also what happened is completely wrong and we need to fix it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard trait to master for sure.
Yeah. Another example of this, and I'm sort of departing from the chronology, but I want to make sure that we get that we get some of the important stuff in, and then if there's time, we can talk a little bit more about some of the other smaller memories that I have over the years of Vickey. But her final sermon, which I think we can provide a link to, the weird advantage of being in a pandemic and being shut down is that everything for this church went virtual, and there's a lot of really good content out there. There's a lot of stuff towards the end of Vickey's life that was very well documented, sort of unintentionally, because they would do these pre-recorded sermons that would then get put together with musical numbers and different recordings, and it was basically this sort of pre-recorded service that would get live streamed on Sundays. So back in June, it was just after the George Floyd shooting, and we're in the midst of the pandemic as well, and there's just a lot going on. I was scheduled to come into the church to do some technical volunteer work, as I often did, but they were sort of restricting a lot of who could come in and who could come out. But I had planned to come in that day to get some work done, and I knew that they were recording the sermon for like the following Sunday or the Sunday after that. I can't remember how far ahead in advance we were, but I thought I was going to get there just like right as they were finishing up, but I guess they were behind with the filming that day. So I walk in, with my tool bag and my latte, just like ready to get to work. And I pop into the sanctuary, and I remember, someone opened the door for me and said, we're not quite ready yet. Vickey still needs to record her sermon for this Sunday. You can sit in here while she records. And so I come in to the sanctuary at the church, and Vickey is sitting on one of the pews, and there's cameras set up and lights and everything, and she had asked the sound engineer to play Bridge Over Troubled Water, I believe it was, over the sound system, and she was sitting there meditating. I had no idea what the sermon was going to be about or what was going on, but I could tell that something that day was a little bit different, and just the feeling and the weight in that room was very strong. And so, there's maybe 4 or 5 of us in the room, various technical support people. The lead pastor, Reverend Troy Tresh, was there. Cassandra, Vickey's wife, who also is the worship arts coordinator, was there. But there were a few of us, and we're all sort of socially distanced around, this sanctuary. And, Vickey finished her meditation, and the song stopped, and she got up. They hit record, and then what happened after that was just 40 minutes of the strongest, most impassioned words I think I have ever heard. It was around Pentecost Sunday, and I'm not super familiar with Pentecost coming from the religious tradition that I was raised, but believe it has to do with the descension of the Holy Spirit among the apostles, and it's a holiday that some denominations celebrate. And the sermon was about how we as a nation have not had our Pentecost moment because of the injustices and the corruption and the discrimination and everything that is going on in our society. And she tied in COVID, about how we were behind on testing and how people, essential workers, were being forced to work in horrible conditions. And for that reason, we have not had our Pentecost moment. How we haven't had our Pentecost moment because Black men are still being shot and killed on the street by police officers. And for that reason, we have not had our Pentecost moment. And it was, I'd rather just let people go and hear the sermon rather than put words in her mouth. But, it's become something that she is really remembered for, was that sermon. None of us had any idea at that point that it would be her last that she would give for the church. But just incredibly powerful stuff, and I could just feel it in the room as I was sitting there. I came in sort of in a hurry. and came in, thinking, well, I'm going to get all of this stuff done while I'm there, and then just had a chance to sit in a pew in the dark by myself in the corner and listen to these words, her final call for action. And I actually remember going up to the tech people afterwards and saying, hey, we need to post a separate link of this sermon because I have a lot of people that I think need to hear this. And they're like, oh, yeah, we can do that. We didn't know that, of course, we would be doing that because this was Vickey Gibbs' final sermon. I also remember, at the end of that 40 minutes or whatever it was, we stopped recording. And one of us said something to the effect of, oh my gosh, Vickey, that was amazing. And her demeanor completely changed. And she said, oh my gosh, was that okay? Was that okay what I just did? And was just like, did I do a good job? And I for some reason remember that detail. We were like, yes, you did a good job. But I think I mentioned before, it's just that she had this happy, sort of bubbly, just friendly personality when you meet her. But then as soon as she was in the zone and as soon as she was, I am preaching now, it was just this commanding presence. And so I'll never forget, one, being there accidentally during her last sermon, and two, just having her come out of that and just look to us to be like, was that okay? And we had a little chance to talk after that sermon where she had acknowledged that I had just announced that I was going back to school for counseling. And so we talked about that a little bit. And, I asked her how the family was and, different things like that. And then we sort of split and went on our way. I had no idea that was going to be the last time that I spoke to Reverend Vickey. I saw her a couple days later at a vigil we had for George Floyd. But that was really the last time that we were able to speak one-on-one, and something that I don't think a lot of people in the congregation were able to do because they were stuck at home, and we were really limiting who was able to be there for obvious reasons. And just the fact that I had the opportunity to be in the room for that sermon will forever impact me. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for that chance. And I'm hoping we can get some links out to people. But it's on YouTube. It's probably the best 40 minutes you could spend to listen to her call for action that she left with us before she unfortunately got sick and passed on. I actually, in honor of talking about her today, I lit a candle to honor the Pulse memory, and I also listened to Bridge Over Troubled Water before we got on this call because I just wanted to remember her and the example that she set, and just sort of get in the right headspace to be able to talk about her today.
Is there anything else besides like Bridge Over Troubled Water that kind of connects you with her now, or that you remember her by?
I meant to dig these up, but I'm currently in the process of moving and couldn't find many of them. I found a couple when I first started going to the congregation. I guess I'm a note taker, not in every situation, but I was in this case because every 2 seconds Vickey would say something. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to write that down. And so I have all of these old bulletins from the church that just have stuff scribbled all over them for, of different things that she had said and different impressions that I had over the years. And I have those somewhere. I think they're in my storage unit. So I want to dig those up and sort of reflect those soon. I did find actually a journal entry that I took from that first sermon, which I guess looking at it now was August 9th, 2015 was the first time that I met Vickey Gibbs. And I just have some bullet points, but it's sort of like, it feels like, this is what, she needed to leave with me. But I have, turn my downtime into dark time, meditate and communicate. Don't miss the beauty in the darkness. Let go of how I expect God to be and embrace God as God is. Take time to look towards the future while learning to incorporate the past. I just have, sort of all of these little bullet points of that first sermon. So I'm definitely going to hold that in high regard. the other thing that's coming up for me is the other thing that I remember Vickey Gibbs by is, and I sort of alluded to this, but I did a lot of technical work because that's what I do, or what I did for a career. I would volunteer sometimes, to help with sound or lights or, different media related stuff for the church, just when I had the time and they could use me. And every Sunday there was like a little meeting that we would do before the service, just to like go over the bulletin and, say, this is who's talking about what, this is what we need as far as like cues, or these are what microphones these people are going to be on, different things. And every Sunday at that meeting, Vickey would bring donuts, and they were very specific. It was the fresh, hot, glazed Shipley's donuts that she would bring almost every week. And, we'd come in and we'd have a donut and we'd, go through our items, and then we'd go and have a service. And at some point after Vickey's passing, somebody said in like a text chain or something that we had about how much they were going to miss the donuts. And I'm like, oh my gosh, those donuts. And we hadn't had them in a few months because, we were virtual. And I think for a few months after her passing, every Sunday I would go and get hot Shipley's donuts. It wasn't great for my diet or my body by any means because I didn't have anybody to share the donuts with. I would still buy a package of donuts almost every week to remember Vickey. And so I guess it's a combination of things. It's remembering, the big things like her meditation and the Bridge Over Troubled Water, to the notes that I took during the sermons, but also little things like the donuts. Or I remember a couple of times where I was doing work at the church, and somehow I would always get voluntold to operate the scissor lift because I think I was the only one that knew how to drive a scissor lift. It was just a consequence of my career in theater. And, we need to clean up up at the top of the sanctuary, or we need to replace a light bulb, or we need to do something. I would always go in the scissor lift. And I remember several times when Vickey would just stand in the corner of the sanctuary while I was operating the scissor lift and like cringe every time I moved it, or every time it moved up and down, because she was afraid for my safety. And several times she would just be like, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you do this. I'm like, I don't know. You just get used to it. But apparently she was very scared of heights, and she was concerned for me because she was scared of heights. So, I mean, even scissor lifts are a thing that I think about Vickey now when they happen.
It's actually kind of interesting because you did mention, like, sometimes it's the bigger stuff, like you said, it's the sermons, but sometimes it's the little random stuff that you do remember that connects you with people, that just now remembering the donuts and everything else, like it'll bring up more memories about them, and you end up smiling more, and you end up remembering all the good times with this person. And I think that's one of the things that we sometimes forget to do whenever we mourn or grieve anyone. We always tend to focus on, what was going on immediately, or that they're not suffering anymore, which is good, but we sometimes forget to remember the small things every now and then about them.
The thing that, if I could impart anything upon the listeners of this, and sort of going back to my original point when I was, should I talk about Vickey? Is this my story to tell? I'm sure there were other people that were closer to her that, went out to dinners and celebrated birthdays and did all of these things that, we weren't necessarily close enough to do. But I didn't realize how much Vickey Gibbs had impacted me until she was gone. That was something that was very clear to me. All of these memories that I'm sharing, the big ones, as well as the small ones, I feel like, in the moment, I sort of took them for granted. I didn't realize how much of an impact she was having on me until the opportunity came to reflect on her life and her ministry more, which was unfortunately when she had passed away. And yeah, it's sometimes just the donuts for your meeting, or, the way someone cares about you when you're using heavy machinery and wants to make sure that you're safe, or, different things like that. But yeah, it's so interesting to me just how much someone can leave in terms of stories, in terms of experiences on everybody that they come in contact with. Like I said, I'm one of hundreds, if not thousands of people that have come across Vickey in the sort of ministry capacity that she was in. And we all had, some personal experiences, some collective experiences, but, if she impacted just me this much, I just can imagine how much she impacted, all of the people that came in and out of her life, while she was here. The other thing that I had the distinct privilege of doing is, of course, because, after Vickey passed of COVID, they didn't want to have an in-person memorial service, just for safety and to make sure everybody was staying home. And so I ended up, editing all of the audio for her memorial service, which is something that, I don't know, trajectory from beginning to the end, walking into that church, knowing nobody, seeing this person on the pulpit that, just was incredible and gave this amazing sermon. I never thought 5 years from now, I'm going to be editing her funeral service. But, I was able to, sitting in my headphones at 2:00 in the morning, the day before we were supposed to release the memorial service, before we were supposed to live stream it, and just listening to all of these people share their memories of her and how she impacted all of them. I feel like, between that and being able to be there for the final sermon, even if we weren't the closest, I feel like I got really blessed in the fact that I had some sort of final experiences with Vickey, towards the end of her life, and then after she passed away, in the form of this funeral service as well. But I'm just so grateful that, little old me had a chance to have this many interactions with her and to have those experiences towards the end that really, helped me remember all of the stuff that she did and how important she was to me.
Yeah. No, it sounds like she was definitely an impactful person to really anyone who interacted with her. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing all these wonderful stories about Reverend Vickey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate, being able to do my small part into getting her story out there.
Of course. Yeah. No, it definitely sounds like she impacted your life in a very strong way, and even those key moments that you were privy to were quite special.
Absolutely.
So, if listeners want to find you either on social media or online, where can they look?
All right. Well, I'm going to pick my Facebook because it's outdated, but not as outdated as my website. It's been, I need to catch up. My music, as well as my, audio production work, can go to facebook.com/BJG Music and Sound. So that's my initials, Bradley J. Gowers, Music and Sound. That's where I'm posting most updates of projects that I'm working on right now. There you'll actually see several virtual choirs from the choirs at Resurrection Metropolitan Community Church. So that's another way that you might be able to connect with Vickey through the work that I've done. You'll also see up there pretty soon some digital productions I've done for the Alley Theater recently. There is really, and you can contact me through there. There's no real online presence for my counseling yet, as I'm not a real counselor, but I will be soon. And at that point, if you're already following me, I'll post information about that.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to send some additional links that you shared for Vickey, and especially her sermon and everything else. Yeah,
absolutely. There's you'll be able to watch the final sermon that I talked about. There's also an interview that she did in 2017, just talking about her journey, which I tried to summarize a little bit, but she does a much better job than I do in describing that. We can also include the link, I think, to the Facebook page. I think I forgot to mention this, but after she passed, the congregants, we created a Facebook group where people could post memories and different pictures and stuff about our time with Vickey. And so if any of this interests you and just hearing one person's account, you can hear the account of hundreds of people by going to the Facebook page.
Yeah. No, that'd be really good to go and visit. Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all for stopping by and meeting Reverend Vickey. If you like hearing all these incredible stories, please consider supporting us through Anchor and like, rate, and subscribe. If you want to reach out and share your own stories, feel free to email us at storiesattheofrenda@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Stories at the Ofrenda. Be safe out there, and we'll see you all soon. Te quiero.